I never imagined I'd be spending my summer in the Kingston's sprawling suburban house, tucked away on a quiet street lined with maple trees. When Josh asked me to house sit while his family took off for Europe, I figured it would be a breeze. A couple of weeks of watering plants, bringing in the mail, and making sure his cat Milo didn't tear up the furniture. Easy enough. Josh and I had been friends since high school, inseparable through college. His family practically felt like my own. His mom would always make extra food when I came over. His younger sister would beg me to join their family game nights, and his dad, well, Mr. Kingston was always a bit of a mystery. I'd only seen him in passing. A quick nod when I walked through the front door or a wave from his car as he drove off. He was a corporate type, always busy, always distant, the kind of man who seemed like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. When I first walked into the house, the silence was almost suffocating. I wasn't used to it being so still. Usually, Josh had music blasting from his room, or his sister was practicing the piano in the living room. But now it was just me and the steady hum of the refrigerator. I dropped my bag by the staircase and took a long look around. The family photos still hung on the walls, smiling faces frozen in time. Christmases, summer vacations, graduations. Mr. Kingston stood in most of them, his arm around his wife, a hand resting on Josh's shoulder. His eyes always looked sharp, watchful. His office door was closed, just like always. I'd never been inside, but I imagined it was full of leather-bound books and heavy oak furniture, the kind of place you'd sip whiskey and contemplate life's big decisions. I almost laughed at the thought. Mr. Kingston always did seem like he belonged in a different era, like he was too polished, too precise for the world we lived in now. I settled in easily enough. The guest room was cozy, with pale blue walls and a window that overlooked the backyard. I fell into a routine, feeding Milo, watering the plants, and spending my evenings sprawled out on the living room couch. I found myself wandering the house more than I intended. I'd study the family photos, linger by the grand piano that hadn't been played in months, and sometimes I'd just stand in the hallway, staring at the closed door of Mr. Kingston's office. I knew he wasn't there. I hadn't seen him in months, not since the separation. The house felt too big for just one person, too empty. Even Milo seemed to notice, curling up next to me more often than not, his small body warm against my side. I found myself wondering about Mr. Kingston more than I probably should have. His photos were still up, but I hadn't seen him around in months. His presence lingered, though, like the scent of his cologne that still clung faintly to the leather couch. I brushed it off as curiosity. Nothing more. After all, it wasn't my business. I was just doing a favor for a friend. But something about that silence felt heavy, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. On the third morning, I woke to the sound of tires crunching over gravel. I glanced at the clock, barely past 8 a.m. My heart stuttered, and I swung my legs out of bed, pulling on a wrinkled t-shirt. Josh hadn't mentioned anyone coming back early. I hurried to the window, peering through the blinds just in time to see the sleek black sedan roll to a stop in the driveway. The door swung open, and Mr. Kingston stepped out. I blinked, momentarily frozen. He was taller than I remembered, shoulders broad beneath the tailored cut of his navy suit. His hair, slightly grayer at the temples, caught the sunlight. He paused for a moment, adjusting his cuffs before grabbing his suitcase from the trunk. A surge of panic flared through me. Was I supposed to be here? I hadn't prepared for this. I rushed down the stairs, Milo skittering underfoot as I made my way to the door. Mr. Kingston was already stepping inside, setting his briefcase down with a soft thud. His gaze lifted, locking onto mine. For a second, neither of us spoke. His expression was unreadable, sharp eyes studying me as if I were an unexpected variable in his otherwise structured life. Hi, Mr. Kingston, I managed, my voice more uncertain than I intended. He raised an eyebrow. I didn't realize anyone would be here. His voice was low and measured, with that same hint of authority I remembered. I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. Yeah, Josh asked me to house sit while you were away. I wasn't expecting you back. It was so soon. He let out a sigh, shoulders relaxing slightly. Change of plans. Work trip got cut short. He paused, taking in the living room. The neatness, the subtle rearranging I'd done out of habit. His eyes landed back on me. "Hope I didn't scare you," I laughed nervously. "No, just surprised." He nodded once, stepping further inside. "You don't have to leave. You're welcome to stay if you'd like." My mouth opened to respond, but I couldn't find the words. Leave? I hadn't even considered it. Something about the way he spoke, the way his voice settled into the room like it belonged there, made it hard to think. Finally, I swallowed and nodded. "If you're sure," he offered a tight smile. "I'm sure." We fell into a strange rhythm after that. It was tense at first. Polite exchanges over breakfast, the occasional conversation about the weather or local news. I tried to keep out of his way, not wanting to intrude, but he didn't seem to mind my presence. If anything, he almost seemed comfortable with it. He'd make coffee in the mornings, strong and black, and leave a cup on the counter for me without a word. At first, I thought it was just a gesture of politeness. But when I missed a morning, I found my cup still sitting there, untouched and cooling. One evening, after the third or fourth day of this routine, I found him sitting on the back porch, a glass of whiskey in hand. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn. I hovered in the doorway for a moment before he looked up and waved me over. "You don't have to hide," he said, a trace of amusement in his voice. I laughed, awkwardly, rubbing my hands together before stepping out. "Didn't want to intrude. You live here, don't you?" He raised his glass, taking a slow sip. I settled into the chair next to him, feeling the cool evening breeze brush against my skin. We talked more that night than we had since he'd come back. About work, about life, about how the house felt too quiet sometimes. He seemed different than I remembered. Softer somehow. Less guarded. He even laughed a few times, real and unrestrained. And I found myself watching the way his shoulders relaxed when he did. I wasn't expecting this, but I couldn't stop looking at him. There was a pause, a heavy silence that lingered between us. His eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw something there. Something unspoken, simmering just beneath the surface. But then he cleared his throat, and the moment shattered. "It's getting late," he said, standing up and dusting off his hands. "I should turn in." I nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat. "Yeah. Good night, Mr. Kingston." "Call me King," he replied over his shoulder, his voice almost too soft to hear. The door shut behind him, leaving me alone on the porch with nothing but the echo of his laugh and the lingering warmth of his presence. The days slipped by quietly, falling into an unspoken rhythm that neither of us acknowledged but both accepted. Morning started early. Too early, honestly. But I found myself adapting to the routine Mr. Kingston, or King, kept. He was up by 6, brewing strong black coffee that filled the house with its bold, comforting aroma. I'd stumble down the stairs, still groggy, to find a cup waiting for me on the counter, steam curling from its surface like an invitation. We didn't talk much during breakfast. He'd read the paper, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, and I'd scroll through my phone or flip through a book. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was almost companionable. Milo would wander in, winding around our legs, and King would occasionally flick a crumb of toast his way, pretending not to notice when Milo jumped onto his lap. It surprised me how easily I adjusted to him being around. At first, I'd been on edge, waiting for him to tell me my presence was too much, that I was overstaying my welcome. But that never happened. Instead, we started moving around each other like it was natural, like this had been happening for years. Afternoons were slower. He'd retreat to his office for a few hours, and I'd take Milo for walks around the neighborhood or water the plants in the back garden. Sometimes, I'd catch myself lingering near his office door, half hoping to hear him call me in, but he never did. I wondered what he did in there, locked away from the rest of the house. It always smelled faintly of cedar and whiskey whenever. He emerged, his tie slightly loosened, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Evenings were my favorite. He'd cook sometimes, surprisingly well, too. Simple things. Roasted chicken, grilled vegetables, pasta with fresh herbs he grew himself. I'd offer to help, and he'd hand me a knife with a nod, wordlessly inviting me to join him. We'd eat together at the wide oak table, clinking forks and the occasional glass of wine, the silence filled with something warm, something steady. After dinner, we'd drift to the living room. He'd flick on the TV, usually some old black and white movie or a late-night talk show, and I'd curl up on the other end of the couch, Milo stretched out between us. The first time he laughed, a real deep laugh, I remember turning to watch him. His head tipped back slightly, eyes crinkling at the corners. He must have felt my gaze because he glanced over, still chuckling. "What?" he asked, his voice lighter than I'd ever heard it. I shrugged, a bit flustered. "I don't think I've ever seen you laugh before." He raised an eyebrow, still smiling. "Guess you've never been around long enough." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled back. But the truth was, he was right. I'd known Mr. Kingston for years, but I'd never known King. And now, living in the same space, sharing meals and quiet evenings, it was like I was seeing him for the first time. It was a week into this new rhythm that he finally opened up. We were sitting on the porch after dinner, a soft breeze rustling the leaves. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, his third for the night, if I was counting right, and his gaze was distant, fixed somewhere past the tree line. "Do you know why Josh's mom and I separated?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I wasn't sure how to answer, so I just shook my head. He swirled the whiskey in his glass, eyes following the amber liquid. "We just stopped trying. Stopped talking. I think we both realized we wanted different things." He took a sip, his gaze hardening. "It's strange, you know, to come back to this house and it's just empty. Like I'm walking through a place that doesn't even belong to me anymore." I listened quietly, my fingers grazing the edge of my chair. His words hung heavy in the air, sinking into the silence. I didn't know what to say, so I just stayed, hoping that was enough. His eyes flicked to me then, sharp and observant. "Sorry," he murmured, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Didn't mean to get all heavy on you." "It's fine," I said quickly. I don't mind." His gaze lingered on me, and for the first time, I saw something there. Something raw, something real. It made my heart thud painfully in my chest. He held my gaze for a beat too long before he looked away, chuckling softly. "It's good having someone around," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. "The house doesn't feel so empty." My breath caught, and I looked down, hoping he didn't notice the flush creeping up my neck. I reached for my glass of water, needing something to do with my hands. But when I reached out, his hand brushed mine. Just a whisper of contact, skin against skin, but it sent a shockwave up my arm. I pulled back instinctively, but he didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on me, searching, questioning. It wasn't just silence between us anymore. It was something electric, and I didn't know if I was ready for it. The storm rolled in fast. One moment the sky was a soft, dusky gray, and the next it cracked open, unleashing sheets of rain that rattled the windows and drowned out the quiet hum of the house. Thunder rolled in like distant drums, low and steady. I stood by the back door, watching the garden vanish beneath the blur of rain when the power flickered, once, twice, then blinked out completely. The silence that followed was suffocating. I called out, "King?" "Living room," came his voice, calm and steady despite the sudden darkness. I followed it, heart thumping a little harder than it should have. He was lighting candles, their soft glow casting flickering shadows across the walls. One sat on the coffee table, its tiny flame struggling to stand upright in the draft. "I guess this is our evening now," he said with a wry smile, settling into the couch. He gestured to the spot beside him. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I did, too much. But I sat anyway. Close. Closer than usual. The candlelight softened everything. His face, the lines around his eyes, even the atmosphere. He wasn't Mr. Kingston anymore, not here in the dark. He was King. Quiet, thoughtful, complicated. A man who hadn't asked for company, but hadn't sent it away either. He let out a sigh and leaned back, the cushion between us sinking just slightly under the weight. I used to love storms as a kid. Used to think thunder was God bowling or something ridiculous like that. I smiled at that. I thought it was giants stomping around. He chuckled. Much more dramatic. There was a pause, and then his voice dropped lower. When I moved out last year, the first night alone, it stormed. I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, listening to the rain and thinking, this is what it's going to feel like now, every night. I turned to him, unsure what to say. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking into the candle flame like it might give him answers. Or courage. I didn't leave her, he said suddenly. She left me. I think part of me still doesn't know what to do with that. I nodded slowly, my throat tight. It's hard, being left behind. Our eyes met then, and for a long, stretching moment, neither of us looked away. The distance between us felt thinner than ever, like the air had been pulled taut. I could feel the warmth radiating off his body, smell the faint mix of soap and whiskey lingering on his skin. He shifted barely, but it felt seismic. His knee brushed mine. He didn't move it away. I started, but my voice faltered. King turned his head slightly, eyes searching mine. You're safe here, he said softly, and I believed him. We stayed like that for a long time, side by side in the dark, sharing stories we hadn't told anyone else. He told me about the first car he ever loved, a busted convertible that died a week after he bought it. I told him about my fear of disappointing people, how I always tried to be whatever everyone else needed. We laughed quietly, and sometimes we didn't say anything at all. Eventually, the storm quieted. The thunder softened into a faraway murmur, and the candle burned low. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of rain still pattering against the windows, and King's jacket draped gently over my shoulders. The couch beside me was empty. The next morning was different. King was already up, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt, the top button fastened, tight like armor. The smell of coffee still filled the kitchen, but the cup meant for me wasn't there. Morning, I said carefully. He looked up, offered a polite smile, then went back to stirring sugar into his coffee. You okay? I asked. Fine, he said too quickly. Just a lot on my mind. I've got work calls today. I nodded, but my chest ached in a way I couldn't explain. The softness from last night had vanished, replaced with something stiff and formal, like he'd pulled back into himself, shut the door. I went back upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed, Milo curling up beside me, sensing the shift. I should have left. I knew that. I'd done what I came to do. But every time I thought about packing my things, my chest tightened. What happened wasn't wrong, but maybe it wasn't right either. And yet, I stayed. I woke up that morning with a heaviness I couldn't shake. The sunlight slanted through the blinds, cutting lines across the floor, and Milo stretched out at the foot of the bed, yawning lazily. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours before I finally sat up and swung my feet to the floor. It was time to go. The thought sat like a stone in my chest, but I couldn't ignore it. Whatever fragile thing had been building between King and me had shattered the morning after the storm. He'd shut me out, locked himself back behind those walls, and I wasn't going to be the one to push them down. I started packing slowly, folding clothes I hadn't really worn, stuffing them back into my duffel bag. Each shirt, each pair of jeans felt heavier than it should have, weighted down by memories of shared dinners, late-night conversations, and the warmth of his jacket on my shoulders. I was zipping up the bag when I heard footsteps outside the door. A soft knock followed. Yeah? I called out, voice tight. The door opened and King stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the bag on the bed, then back at me. You're leaving? I swallowed hard. I've been here long enough. I don't want to overstay. He stood there for a moment, hands still on the doorknob, eyes flickering between me and the half-packed room. You haven't overstayed. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just shrugged, fiddling with the zipper. Yeah, well, it's probably best. His hand slipped from the doorknob, falling to his side. He let out a breath, slow and measured. Have dinner with me tonight. I blinked, caught off guard. What? Dinner, he repeated, voice firmer this time. Stay for one more night. My heart thudded painfully, but I managed to nod. Okay, one more night. Dinner was quiet, almost painfully so. We ate in near silence, the clinking of silverware the only sound. King seemed tense, shoulders tight, gaze flicking up to me every now and then like he wanted to say something but couldn't quite find the words. I pushed food around my plate, not tasting any of it, my thoughts spinning faster than I could keep up. Finally, as the plate sat empty and the wine glasses drained, he broke the silence. It's been a long time since I felt like this, he began, his voice low, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. The house has been empty for so long. I thought it would always feel that way. I held my breath, afraid that if I spoke, I'd shatter whatever courage he'd built up. He looked up then, eyes sharp and searching. You make it feel alive again. I didn't realize how much I missed that. My heart lurched and I could feel my pulse hammering in my fingertips. I'm glad I could help, I managed, the words coming out shakier than I wanted. He reached across the table then, his hand covering mine. His palm was warm, solid, grounding. I didn't pull away this time. I didn't want to. His thumb traced slow circles over my knuckles, his eyes never leaving mine. You don't have to go, he whispered, voice breaking just slightly at the edges. Not if you don't want to. I swallowed, my throat tight. And if I want to stay? His eyes softened, his grip tightening just a little. Then stay. There was no space left between us then. I leaned forward, barely breathing, and his hand slipped from mine, reaching up to cup my face, his fingers cool against my skin. I could smell the faint hint of his cologne, something woodsy and clean, and I closed my eyes, leaning into it. When his lips touched mine, it wasn't desperate. It wasn't frantic. It was careful, deliberate, like he was trying to memorize every second of it. His hand cradled the back of my head, his other arm snaking around my back, pulling me just a little closer. My hands found his shoulders, then his neck, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my fingertips. His breath hitched, and I felt his grip tighten. I pulled back just enough to look at him, his eyes searching mine for any hint of regret. There wasn't any. I didn't know what would happen tomorrow, I whispered, my voice barely audible. But right then, we were both choosing each other. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. His hands stayed on me, solid and steady, anchoring me to the moment, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The morning sun streamed through the blinds, cutting golden lines across the kitchen floor. The smell of freshly brewed coffee hung in the air, familiar and comforting. I sat at the kitchen table, Milo curled up at my feet, his tail flicking lazily. King stood at the counter, pouring 2 mugs, his movements unhurried. We didn't say much, but we didn't need to. He set my cup down in front of me, our fingers brushing for the briefest moment. I looked up, searching his face for anything. Regret, hesitation. But there was none. Just that same quiet warmth. That easy steadiness I'd come to know over the past few weeks. We ate breakfast like it was any other morning. Toast, scrambled eggs, a splash of orange juice. Outside, birds chirped from the oak tree in the yard, their song drifting in through the open window. King read the paper, glasses perched on his nose, and I found myself stealing glances when I thought he wouldn't notice. But he did. I could see it in the way his lips curled at the corners, the way he looked up from the paper just long enough to catch my eye, his gaze softening before he returned to the headlines. It was like a secret we both held, tucked between us and left unspoken. By mid-morning, my bags were packed and waiting by the door. I lingered in the hallway, hand resting on the banister, eyes tracing the familiar lines of the place I'd come to know so well. The piano in the corner, the wide oak table in the dining room, the leather-bound books that filled the shelves. King walked me to the door, his hands slipping into his pockets. He didn't look away, his eyes fixed on mine, steady and unyielding. "Thank you," he said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For making it not feel so empty." His voice dipped, barely above a whisper. "It's been a long time since it felt like home." I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodding slowly. I'm glad I could help. There was a pause, thick with the weight of things unsaid. I opened my mouth, then closed it, unsure of what to add. Finally, I settled for, I don't know what happens next. King smiled, a real smile, soft and genuine. Me neither. He took a step closer, his hand reaching out to squeeze mine just once, firm and reassuring. But the house won't feel so empty next time. The words settled over me, warm and steady. I nodded, fighting the urge to look back as I opened the door. The sunlight spilled in, bright and welcoming, and I stepped outside, the breeze catching my hair as I walked to my car. As I climbed in and turned the key, I looked back one last time. King stood in the doorway, one hand raised in a wave, his expression open and unguarded. I waved back, my heart fluttering painfully in my chest, came to house sit. I didn't know I'd leave with my heart rearranged, and as I pulled away I realized I'd be coming back.